this meeting. First of all, I would say that the framework of our panel seems to me not broad enough. So why to speak about regional actors only? If we take, for example, situation in Iraq, so some non-regional actors, they play even bigger role than those in the region itself. If we speak precisely about the United States, with the number of its military bases in the region, including Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, other states, plus their illegal military presence in Syria. So in all this respect, the United States become quite a regional actor in terms of situation in Iraq. Second thing I wanted to mention is that modern Iraq appeared in very specific conditions. When non-regional countries came to this place, occupied it, and started fulfilling their agendas. Well, that's well known. And many regional actors felt threatened by what was happening. That was, by the way, crazy time. And Iraq became an arena of big struggle between different powers. And Iraq was only a paper in the struggle, or just an arena. And the logics, the atmosphere of that struggle exists here in this country up to now and affects what is happening. And finally, when we speak about the Desecuritise, well, it's a complicated word for me, sorry. Anyway, you all know it. If we speak about this issue, then let's try to understand what is really going on in terms of relationship between countries in the region and position of regional and non-regional actors towards Iraq and what is happening in Iraq. Since I have only 5 minutes, I can't go deep into details, but the idea is just let's think together what these countries want from Iraq, first of all. And here we would find that political and security, military agenda in general, it prevails over economic interests, for example. Of course, we would prefer that economic interests would prevail, but well, here, if we take into consideration, for example, if we just look at struggles in the region, they are mainly for security. So this issue with this hard to pronounce this word, won't be easy, but it's good to discuss it. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. I thank MERI and especially Dr. Alauddin for inviting me to share my view as an Iranian academic. Let me point out three propositions. First of all, I think desecuritization will mostly benefit Iran. There is no doubt, because if we look at Iranian strategic thinking, we understand that Iran sees the insecurity in the region in a broader sense. And in that context, it is enhancing its deterrent power in a way. We should not forget that the last decade developments in the region has brought about a lot of costs for the Iranian people. Either it is in the context of symmetric threats or asymmetric threats, violence of terrorism or adversary countries who are endangering Iranian security as a state in a broader sense. Therefore, I think this is the concept that Iran cares a lot. My second point is Iran's relations with the dynamic of Ukrainian crisis. It was mentioned in the previous session. We should not deduct the Iranian-Russian relations in the Ukrainian crisis. Before that, in a broader strategic sense, Iran and Russia have had nuclear cooperation, weapon sales, transfer of trade, and of course, a lot of other things. So it is a broader cooperation. Iran declared its neutrality in the Ukrainian crisis, but we should accept that Iran is following a kind of positive neutrality to balance its own interest in this war. It is an opportunity for Iran, as it is an opportunity for Saudi Arabia and Turkey that are balancing their interest based on the new dynamics. I think in the great power conflicts, the regional players find a place to breathe and play their own role based on their own independent political economic trends. It is very natural, and I think this is very much significant. My third point, as it was mentioned in the previous session, the unrest in Iran. I think Iran competitor and adversary countries like America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia and other players know that this development will not lead to the so-called regime change. But they are hoping that by dividing Iran, they can impose their terms on the nuclear deal. But I can tell you this, that a divided Iran will never talk. Only a strong Iran will talk. A divided, politically structured Iran will, as history shows, never wanted to go to negotiations because it feels it will lose in a way. Therefore, I think this is a wrong assumption that they think that in such situation they can somehow weaken Iran and then talk with Iran. So my point is that this unrest needs to be addressed, of course, by the Iranian government, but in a sense of a strategic, characteristic, we should understand that if the other country would like to weaken Iran, that will lead to more strengthening of Iran's deterrent power in a different way, going to Russia, China, trying to make an Asian alliance, trying to strengthen relations with Iraq, Turkey, and other countries, even with Saudi Arabia, or other unconventional deterrent power strategy. This is my third point. I think it is enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just pick up immediately on what you said? So do I understand it right, that for as long as the unrest is ongoing in Iran, we're further away from a nuclear deal?
You're completely right, I think, because political consensus is key to go to negotiations. And the unfortunate thing is that we have taken one step back regarding the conventional and traditional. Therefore, it was in the previous session, Kurdish colleague mentioned about the disappointment about the American actions. Iran has the sense, but Iranian people, because they honestly wanted to accommodate their problem with the U.S. by a nuclear deal to benefit from the lifting of economic sanctions, and that is somehow has been hard for the Iranian people economically. Therefore, I think this distrust will somehow impact the Iranian decision makers to not trust America, especially given the fact that the change of government in the US is very likely, and the Republican is very likely to come to power. So the Iranian cannot trust in that regard. And tell you one thing more. The nuclear issue is not as big as it is in outside world for the Iranian. Nowadays, we do not talk that much. We do not relate, the nuclear deal to Iran's economic, context. Therefore, Iran has decided to go ahead with its own way, trying to empower itself from inside, try to connect its economy with China and Russia, and a kind of connectivity in the neighborhood zone in a way that could cope with these current economic constraints.
Thank you. Ambassador, following on to some of the things that you mentioned, I wanted to dive in specifically to the conference that we saw convened in Tehran earlier this year over the summer with President Putin, Raisi, and Erdogan. How would you explain this type of conference in the light of some of the tensions that still remain, especially in Syria, with the potential of a Turkish military incursion and with your own country's current entanglement in Ukraine? I'd like to hear you elaborate on that and what the impact could be of this kind of dialogue between these three countries in the region.
Well, as far as I remember, that summit was mainly concentrating in terms of international relations, I mean, to situation in Syria. First of all, it comes in the framework of Astana platform, which we have, when three countries talk to each other on how to find decisions to deal with that issues on Syria. It is not a framework for making deals on Syria. It's very important. It's a framework to discuss how we can cooperate in order to improve the complicated Syrian situation. As far as Ukraine, well, the Ukraine issue, it's mostly subject for dialogue between, if we speak about these three countries, between Russia and Turkey. So they have their positions on this issue, we have our position, and in many issues we managed to agree, not about Ukraine itself, but about what good things can Turks do in order to make this problem easier. Well, as for Iran, Iran is our strategic partner since long ago. We've been partners in terms of Iranian nuclear program. We see no problem in its development. We don't trust those who try to terrorize us by speaking that Iran is trying to make an atomic bomb. Well, atomic bomb, nuclear weapon, all this stuff, it's the question of technologies of first half of 20th century. So if a country wants to develop military program, it simply does. Well, Iran had a lot of chances to do it and never did that. So we don't believe in bad Iranian intentions in this issue. But we demand that dialogue should continue and, well, things which concern Western states should be solved. Well, it was mentioned that present-day unrest in Iran has a connection, probably has connection to the nuclear dossier. Well, I'm personally sure it has. To what extent, it's hard for me to say. I'm not a specialist in these issues. I would prefer to speak about Middle East and Iraq precisely. But anyway, there's always chance for dialogue. And this dialogue between three leaders of Russia, Iran, and Turkey is effective in terms of finding solutions to many regional issues. But you shouldn't go too far in terms of thinking about some conspiracy or deals being made. It's, first of all, platform for dialogue. The dialogue is constructive, pragmatic, and it often allows us to reach certain results. I hope I've given the answer. Well, we diplomats cannot talk straightly about things. Sorry.
Well, I should say, unfortunately, we would have had a Turkish voice also on the panel, who unfortunately had to cancel last minute. But perhaps we can have some questions or comments from the audience later that would sort of fill in on the Turkish side more on this. But I would like to come back to Professor Kayhan. perhaps you can also speak to this event and its prospects. But I would also like to come back, because you did not speak so much about Iran-Saudi relations. And considering that Iraq has been a facilitator in this, I would also like to hear what you think of its continuation going forward, considering what is happening currently in Iran.
Yes. The relations between Iran and GCC should be divided between Saudi Arabia and its allies, that it was UAE and Bahrain, and other countries. Iran had good relations with other Persian Gulf countries, but UAE has developed a good relations with Iran. But the Saudis are confused. There have been 5 rounds of talk. The latest one was positive. But nowadays, I think the Saudis are confused in a sense that they are waiting to see what will happen in America. Of course, their actions towards balancing balanced relations with Russia is somehow shows a course of change in Saudi's foreign policy, diversifying its foreign policy, which benefits Saudi Arabia and its respectable, and with China as well. But regarding Iran, I think the Saudis need more time. They think that they will lose in any negotiations. They wanted to talk with Iran on settling the Yemeni issues. The Iranian wanted to somehow put it in a broader sense. The Iranian helped to seize the ceasefire in Yemen and cooperated, but the Saudis, I think, still need some time to initiate meaningful negotiations with Iran. When it goes to Iraq, of course, thankfully, I think we are out of these historical constructs that goes to the past time that Iran and Iraq were two geopolitical rivals. Now, the two have a lot of commonalities. That goes to the historical, geographical, and cultural determination. I mean, geography matters a lot. Connectivity, trade connectivity, and the Arbain issue, other issues, all of them connect Iran and Iraq. They are not geopolitical rivals. It was a construct. It removed from the mindset of the two countries. It was the Ba'athist regime kind of conceptualization of Iran and sometimes Western countries. Therefore, the security of Iraq matters for Iran, but the problem is the legacy of the U.S. Involvement in the regional politics, the fiasco in Afghanistan, in Iraq, dealing with the Kurdish people, all aspects. You see, the U.S. presence has brought nothing but war, violence, and regime change, aspiration and other things. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the security of Iran and Iraq is linked together. But what makes the dilemma is the other countries' actions. We should not forget that the regional development has been costly for Iran too. I mean, a combination of symmetric and asymmetric threats that endanger the Iranian state security in a broader sense. Therefore, when Iran is involved, sometimes it is being perceived as Iran's expansionist role in the region, but from the Iranian understanding, it is the regional problems that is coming to Iran, and Iran has to go in a way to protect itself, especially considering the fact that Iran feels a sense of a strategic loneliness that was started with the Ba'athist regime war against Iran that has led Iran to count on itself and strengthen itself in a different way. Therefore, what we see is not our neighboring countries' problem with Iran. I think it is the rival countries of Iran that are at the top, the US and Israel, that are trying to pose threats to Iranian national security.
Thank you.
May I make a remark on this issue? It's worth mentioning that if we speak about the desecuritizing, I managed it, desecuritizing relations in the region. It's well known that there is international and regional consensus that Iraq should remain stable. Though some countries may differ in terms of the way they understand the stability. But it's okay, everybody wants us to be stable. The next question is whether these countries, or some of these countries, want Iraq to be not just stable, but strong, prosperous, and etc. So, and here it's a big question for me. Because I'm sure that according to its potential, human resources, natural resources, even military potential, Iraq can, if all these potentials are realized, it can easily become not just a strong state, but a regional superpower. So, and here comes the next question: who in the region wants to see Iraq as a superpower? That's a big issue, and again, this shows that desecuritizing is something what we want to happen, but I mean as representatives of international community. But in terms of practical steps or realities on the ground, who in the region, and to mention some countries outside the region, want this to happen? So in this issue, well, security affairs and global political affairs would prevail on interests in terms of social economic cooperation. Well, that's how I see it. Thank you.
Perhaps we could also have a comment later, but I will open up for questions in terms of how Iran would see a strengthened Iraq very quickly before I open up for questions from the audience.
How Iran would see?
View a strengthened Iraq, as the ambassador was alluding to. What would that mean for Iran?
I think every country, given their regional development, needs to count on itself. This motto, Iraq for all, I would say that Iraq for itself. This is the way that the countries are treating with themselves. You know, Saudi Arabia is doing that, Turkey is doing that, Iran is doing that. Every country is trying to strengthen itself from inside. This goes to the trade, to cultural, relations, connectivity, geography, as I mentioned, good neighborhood relations. Therefore, if we go in that direction, I think a lot of problems will be solved. And I do not see that much problems, not coming from this discourse of, a style of governing a country. What matters is that too much war and involvement of foreign actors in the regional politics has divided the regional countries in their domestic politics. I think the region should be left alone to think of themselves, and Iraq is one of them.
Thank you. Okay, we will open up for questions. We'll take one question at a time, and then I'll see some other people. So please, where are the mic people? I don't see you. Okay, so can we start with Hiwa and then Lizzie?
Thank you. Thank you for the eye-opening presentations. Kayhan, good to see you again. Since the last conference, Iran fired 12 ballistic missiles not very far from here. And we are still trying to figure out the message from that. The Iraqi Parliament's committee and Iraqi intelligence report said definitely there is no any Israeli presence on the site. Can you help us understand what was the message of those 12 ballistic missiles in Erbil if Iran is so concerned about the security in Iraq. This is one. My second question is, a few years ago there were protests in Baghdad, and they were not far from your embassy, the Iranian embassy, across the river. Nearly 700 people were killed, protesters. Who do you think killed them? Thank you.
What was
So-
the second question?
Hiwa, sorry, would you mind repeating your second question? Was it?
3 years ago, protests happened across the river from the Iranian embassy in Baghdad, and nearly 700 people were killed. And as an embassy, you know, or they know everything that goes on in this city. Who do you think killed the 700 people? Because the Iraqi government hasn't figured out yet who killed them. Thank you.
Okay, so start.
Yeah. Well, starting with the second question, I don't know. You should ask the Iraqi authority, perhaps, to what happened in this regard. This should be a very accurate intelligence, report. As an academic, I heard for the first time, to be honest, about this. But regarding the missiles, again, I heard differently. I think the Iranian intelligence services confirmed that there were Israeli elements in those places in KRG. And because we had this debate inside Iran that how much it was true and accurate, then it turned out that this was based on accurate and precise intelligence report that was attacked. To be honest, I think Iran cannot tolerate the Israeli element to somehow, endanger Iran's security. And even, the current unrest is somehow by the Iranian government declared that it's coming from the region. And there is the Israeli hand in intensifying and operationalizing, the unrest inside Iran. I am an academic. I can tell you this true story that when in the universities, for instance, a gathering, happens, there are 2-3 elements that come to lead the, demonstrations, and they go, disappear. And poor students will be left alone on the scene. And then, this happens because according to the Iranian law, the security forces cannot enter to the university, and university itself should handle any unrest inside the university. Therefore, these things are, approved that there is a foreign hand in somehow intensifying unrest inside Iran. And at the top of that goes to Israel.
So we first have Lizzie and then Tanya. Okay, yeah, we can go with Tanya first and then Lizzie. Sorry, did you have the mic? No, okay.
Thank you. Jindagi Azadi. The one thing that I'm actually interested in hearing and what you just told me about that there is an outside hand with regards to these demonstrations and everything that is happening. I am very shocked at you saying this because everybody knows that it is a homegrown movement that is taking place. And keeping on blaming it on the outside forces is not going to service the country, it's not going to service the regime, it's not going to service the people. So please, please stop spreading those lies about the demonstrations and everything that is happening. Jinjian Azadi.
Lizzie, back to... No. Lizzie, would you put up your hand again? Yeah. Okay.
صباح الخير. هاشم الحسيني من أكاديمية التطوير السياسي والحكمة الرشيد. سؤالي لسعادة السفير. سعادة السفير، بعد قرار المحكمة الاتحادية بعدم دستورية قانون النفط والغاز بإقليم كردستان، ووزارة النفط ألزمت الشركات العاملة بالإقليم بالانسحاب، الشركات الروسية لم تتعامل مع هذا الموضوع، فكيف تفسر تعاملكم الثنائي بين بغداد وبين إقليم كردستان؟ أي العلاقات أقوى تعتقدون، علاقتكم مع الإقليم أم علاقتكم مع المركز؟ شكرا.
Shall I respond in Arabic or English?
As you wish. There is translation.
Good. Just to make my answer more precise, I'll respond in Arabic. أول شيء القرار يعود إلى الجهات العراقية. الدستورية وعدم الدستورية هذا شأن عراقي. نحن كروسيا اتحادية فقط استغربنا من أنه إذا كانت شركات خلال سنوات تعمل في إقليم، يعني كيف يمكن إعلان هذا العمل غير شرعي بعد مرور هيك فترة من الوقت. بس إن شاء الله نأمل أنه إن شاء الله يتم إيجاد حلول لهذه القضية بطريقة حضارية وشرعية. يعني أنا فعلا شخصيا لا أرى مشكلة كبيرة في هذا الموضوع. أعتقد أنه هذا الموضوع السياسة به السياسة تلعب دور في أكثر من غيره. فطالما هناك انسداد سياسي في العراق الآن منتهي، فبالتأكيد سنجد أنه هذه القضية سيتم حلها في وقت قريب إن شاء الله. لحد الآن الشركات الروسية عاملة في كردستان العراق ما عانت من أي شيء، يعني ما لم يفرض عليها شيء أو لم يطلب منها شيء، فقط جلسات المحكمة ولا غيره، وهذا عمل للمحامين أكثر لرجال النفط والغاز. نعم.
Thank you. So,
الجواب مش كافي؟
just next to you, go back slightly. No, go back behind you. Okay. We've skipped over several times. And then we will come to Stanley.
This on, can you hear me? Lizzie Porter, Iraq Oil Reports, and my question is for Arai Kayhan. We know that energy exports are a major part of the relations between Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, and I'm very aware that there's not a Turkey representative on the stage today. Turkey currently imports gas from Iran and has recently extended a contract around doing so, as I understand it. But Iraqi Kurdistan is also aiming and has big aims to export gas to not only Turkey but Europe through Turkey. How does Iran view such potential future exports, given that it may seem to provide competition to gas exports from Iran? Thank you.
Well, let me start with the last questions. I think the course of exchange of gas and oil is witnessing a new development. Some time ago, there was this discussion that Iran and Russia are competitors in a gas market. Nowadays, they cooperate, they're happy. I think this context of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Russia, connectivity of oil and gas by pipelines and geopolitics of pipelines will benefit all. The only thing will leave is just coordination. I think I brought this geographical factor that the future of the region rests on that. I think this is very much important, especially with the Ukrainian war and the sanction wall in the western wing of Russia. Russia ultimately goes to the south, India, and through that to China, opening another gate for gas and oil export. So the patterns of exportation and importation of oil and gas has changed in the world. Therefore, I do not see any kind of competition. I think Turkey could act. Turkey could take Iran's oil and gas to Europe. Russia could do that. Russia has a plan. The ambassador could say more on that. Iran could take Russian oil and deliver it in the swap kind in the Persian Gulf to India and China. So there are a lot of dynamics that is being appeared. I think the Eurasian landlocked region could be opened by this new connectiveness that is geopolitically appearing in the world politics. This is very much significant and strategic, and I think this is the real trend that is happening. The world is not just the West. I think other countries have found a place to express themselves geopolitically. And I think the process of de-Westernization is somehow being accelerated with the Ukrainian war and the Russian position and Chinese position, and Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia's position. India also. Iraq could also be part of that because Iraq is part of this core of geopolitics. Therefore, I do not see any contradiction for this new style of export and import of oil and gas and energy. Regarding the unrest, I mentioned at the beginning that an unrest could begin for any reason. And Iran is not a country that has not seen this. I think it has been 100 years, starting from the constitutional revolution in 1905 or 6, that the Iranians wanted to find their own place in democratization. This unrest has started for a reason, but what I try to say is that it was intensified because those who are behind this think that what they couldn't do by negotiations in 15 years, it could be done by the Iranian young girl at home. But to be honest, Iran is a powerful country. It is an old state. It cannot be easily collapsed from inside by unrest. Of course, I believe that the government should address social reform, economic demands, expectation, other things. But the way it goes the way it wanted by the others will lead to a divided Iran that will not be good for the region, not only for the Iran, but also for the region. A stability of Iran is important for the stability of the region. Quick and sudden kind of the so-called regime change will not benefit in a longer-term strategic thinking for the region. Therefore, we should not be emotional in that regard.
Okay. We will move on to Ustad Kinani.
أمير الكناني، السؤال للسيد باحث من إيران، ما هو الموقف الإيراني من عملية التطبيع التي قام فيها حزب الله المقرب من إيران في لبنان؟
Was the question clear?
ما هو الموقف الإيراني من عملية التطبيع التي قام بها حزب الله في لبنان مع إسرائيل من خلال البدء في ترسيم الحدود والاعتراف بدولة إسرائيل كدولة كاملة السيادة في المنطقة؟
You don't understand the question.
Can you put it in English, because I don't understand. I didn't take the question. Yeah, what?
Iran's role. What's the role of Iran in backing?
What's the reaction of Iran
To
struck between Israel and Lebanon?
I think
This is a first step, according to him, in normalizing relations between Lebanon and Israel, especially with Hezbollah being the Iranian.
He mentioned Hezbollah.
I
Hezbollah, he mentioned.
Well, many say that Hezbollah follows Iran's, pattern of and style of politics. If so, then Iran approved that. To accept the reality on the ground, sometimes, Hezbollah's position in the Lebanese politics matters for Iran. A powerful Hezbollah is good for Iran, as a powerful Iran is good for Hezbollah. Therefore, I think this has been a balancing act in a region that you mentioned, Randa, in the morning, in the previous session, that it's a good way of win-win context for a start in a region full of problems. Therefore, I think Iran sometimes take some decisions that benefit for the stability of the region. In this case, I think Iran has accepted that and accept the benefit and interest of Hezbollah in the Lebanese politics. I'm sure of it.
We had a question from the gentleman in the front. Okay, then in the back, the very back. Yeah. And then.
مشتاق رمضان من قناة روداو. سؤالي إلى السفير الروسي المحترم. تعرض إقليم كردستان والحقول الطاقة سواء الغاز أو النفطية إلى قصف متكرر من الفصائل المسلحة التي بعضها قالت أنها لم تتبنى هذا القصف. كيف ترون هذا القصف وهل هو نوع أو كوسيلة ضغط على إقليم كردستان في سبيل عدم تصدير الطاقة إلى أوروبا المحتاجة حاليا بشدة للطاقة؟ شكرا.
قصدك أي قصف؟ قصف من أي جهة؟ Please give him the microphone.
القصف الذي تتعرض له حقول النفط والطاقة في إقليم كردستان من أي طرف كان سواء من فصائل مسلحة أو من غيرها يتعرض الإقليم إلى قصف حقول الطاقة حقول
قصدك
الغاز.
قصف إيراني أو غير إيراني؟
أي قصف كان سواء من داخل العراق أو من خارج العراق.
Well, I think I'll respond in English. We're against any kind of attacks on Iraqi Kurdistan, no matter whether it's whether we speak about oil fields or non-oil fields. We don't like it. Well, I think the answer is obvious. If we speak about recent Iranian attacks on Iraq, this issue was discussed in the Security Council, and Russia supported the question of issuing statement on these attacks. Well, there was huge debate inside Security Council. Americans who came with draft refused to take into consideration all our concerns, and when they realized that Russia plus China plus Emirates, as far as I remember, have big questions about the draft statement, then they simply stopped this work. And the Security Council didn't issue any statement. And it was not Russia's fault. If you meant that very issue, well, I'm responding to it. We consider that no country should be attacked from any side. All these issues should be solved peacefully, considering interests of all sides. Well, excuse me, your question was very broad. It's hard for me to respond precisely.
صباح الخير. صباح الخير. شكرا طبعا للصراحة بالنقاش والأسئلة. أنا سؤالي مختلف شوية بالاقتصاد والاستثمار. سؤالي ممكن الإجابة عليه من سعادة السفير أو ضيفنا من إيران. متى ستعي دول الجوار والمحيط الإقليمي والدولي أهمية إخراج علاقتها مع العراق من الطابع الأمني إلى الاستثماري، وخاصة أن العراق يمتلك موارد كبيرة؟ شكرا.
Who would like to answer?
Well, I study international relations. We have a theory that relates to integration. In that sense, the core theme of this theory is that countries that complete their economies could be successful in a way. That means that Iraq has oil, Iran has oil, they have nothing to give to each other. But the theory could be somehow redefined and restructured in a way. We're not talking about integration in a traditional sense. I think one thing that we should understand is the regional supply chain, connectivity through land, sea, and road. This is very much important that the the commodities come from China by train or by road and reach to Iraq. And the transit diplomacy here matters a lot. So we are not just talking about economic integration. We rather talk about regional connectivity and regional supply chains that could come from Russia, landlocked Eurasia, Asia, Persian Gulf, through Iraq to the east, and through Iran to the west, geographically to Iraq. So there is great potentials of economic trade and commerce between the two sides. I tell you that in the time of Saddam Hussein, Ba'athist regime, Iran-Iraq economic exchanges was zero. Now, plus KRG, it is about $15 billion. So it's abstract historical constructs that not let the two sides to manage economic trade. Now the way is open, I think. The only thing is coordination and managing the resources. And this is easily possible because geographically the two countries are linked and linked to different sub-regions.
A question from the gentleman.
صباح الخير. سؤالي للسفير الإيراني بخصوص الحدود البحرية للبصرة. يعني احنا نعرف انه الحدود البحرية بعدها ما مثبتة ويتم التجاوز من قبل إيران على الحدود البحرية، ووصل الحال إلى العوامة اللي قريبة من ميناء العمية، ويريدون يأخذون حتى ميناء العمية باعتبار من ضمن حدود البحرية لإيران. ثاني سؤال بخصوص أنهر البزل من إيران اللي يصب في شط العرب، وبالتالي هذه سموم تدخل إلى أهالي البصرة. وثالث سؤال موضوع موقف إيران من موضوع تحول البصرة والمحافظات إلى الفيدرالية إلى الأقاليم. سمعنا أنه تصريح للمرشد الأعلى بخصوص موضوع الفيدرالية، وهل هو بالضد أو مع هذا الخصوص؟
Did you catch several questions there?
Well, I think this is a kind of mismanagement and bureaucratic deficiencies, The officials of two sides should sit together and solve. We have a lot of problems. It goes to the rivers. We have problems, for instance, with Turkey by constructing dams on the upper side of, rivers that brought, climate crisis for Iraq and Iran too. So it is something that needs to be cooperated in a kind of middle manager officials in a way. It's not the way that we put it in a kind of politicized way, trying to make a problem out of it, I guess.
And in terms of the question of decentralization or federalism, as he alluded to?
Decentralization of? I didn't get that.
Of the provinces in Iraq. So I assume the gentleman coming from Basra speaks to the desire of Basra as a province to see more devolved powers.
Well, the Iranian style has always been to a powerful central government, no doubt. This is very Iranian to see a state intact in a way. Of course, some argue that confederation might, in a very minimal way, might help to some extent solve some problems. But I don't think this would be the policy of Iran to see the southern part be independent.
Dambash, بخير بين بو هوليري وهدية دمك خوش. Saman Umar, National Security Researcher. My question to Mr. Ambassador, you just mentioned through your speech that the Astana and the recent meeting was about somehow come up with a solution for the Syria situation. So can we hear from you directly your perspective and understanding for the Russia regarding to the Rojava and Kurdish question for self-determination? If there is a hope, understanding, can you be directed about do you think like Turkey they are threatening the Kurdish in Rojava, and how is the Russian response will be? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's all in all a complicated issue, and if we speak about Rojava, so I wish an American representative was with us here, because for us this northeast Syria is territory which we consider to be occupied, and not by Turks but by Americans. They have illegal military presence there. As far as I remember, about 1,000 troops, plus probably the same number of mercs who came there as private military company. So they are controlling this area and controlling smuggling of Syrian oil to, well, mostly to Iraq. Well, that's the situation. So if we speak about Rojava issues, it's not a question to Russian Federation, first of all. What we are trying to do in terms of future of Rojava is to provide that some kind of settlement would be reached between Damascus and Rojava. And the progress is going on, though very slowly. Finally, we see that Rojava officials, they recognize that Syria should be one united country. So the question is what kind of autonomy they can achieve. And here the situation becomes even more complicated according to many issues, like geographical, demographic, and so on. Well, it won't be enough for one day to discuss all these issues, so I won't go into details. Russian role there is the role of mediator. We mediate between Damascus and Rojava, trying to persuade two sides to come closer together. And in this issue, we face quite serious opposition from United States, who don't want any settlement between Rojava and Damascus. They have their own agenda in this area, which is mainly based on anti-Iranian principles or ideas. As for Turkey, this is what we mean when we say that Astana framework is effective. We talk to Turks and provide that their behavior towards northeast Syria is at least predictable. They want to continue their military activities in that area. They have their, if you want to say it, concerns or something like that about security situation in the region. They say that they are threatened from that side. And we provide that they would feel a little bit more comfortable and not use, again, force against that area. So Russian military officers, they stand on this line between pro-Turkish forces and the Kurdish forces, and in fact with their bodies they provide that both sides won't start fighting. Though sometimes shells come over their heads. This is what we are trying to do. I hope I gave answer to your question. Thank you.
We have the one last question before the break, please.
مركز عشتار لدعم الديمقراطية. سؤالي للسفير الروسي: بعد احتدام الصراع ما بين روسيا والولايات المتحدة بسبب الأزمة الأوكرانية، أسأل: هل إن مناطق النفوذ في الشرق الأوسط ستتغير؟ بمعنى أنه هل سنشهد اقتراب روسي من بغداد لحلحلة أزمات كثيرة، وخاصة أزمة انتشار الحزب العمال الكردستاني في المنطقة ما بين العراق وسوريا، ناهيك عن أنه العراق من الدول التي ستدخل سوق الغاز مستقبلا. ثالثا أنه بغداد تقع بين صديقين لروسيا وهم دمشق وطهران. شكرا.
In 1 minute if possible.
45 seconds. Well, first of all, Iraq is a friend for us, so I don't need to explain that we are ready to support Iraq in all issues at once. And our cooperation with Baghdad covers many issues, including security one. As for Kurdistan Working Party activities, again, I would say that this question should be addressed to United States representative and precisely CENTCOM representative, because they cover the Öcalan party's activities in Syria at least. As for the same party's activities in Iraqi territory, well, I have no comment on that because we cannot, it is not the issue we are dealing with. The question is not to us. Thank you.
And thank you, Professor Kayhan.
Our moderator's dictatorship doesn't allow me to go deeper in details.
This is what I've been told. When the music comes on, that is when it's time is to cut. Thank you very much, everyone, for your challenging questions, for the frank conversation. And we're waiting for a break in the next panel in about 15 minutes. Thank you.